Hello. Last night when we were doom scrolling at 2 a.m., here at Meta, we had a plethora of AI agents that are merging thousands of diffs, triaging tens of uncalled pagers, and answering tens of thousands of questions. One of the core agentic systems we have here is Metamate, and I'll be sharing more about it today. Our mission with Metamate is that it's not just a smarter chatbot. It is actually a coworker that understands your work and helps you become much more productive. My name is Hussein. I lead AI Frontier Systems at Meta. And in this talk, I'm going to share with you how we evolved Metamate from just a chatbot to a coworker by solving some tough technical challenges. But first, let me show you how quickly it has grown to be much more than hype. Metamate is used by tens of thousands of Meta employees every day. In fact, more than 50% of Meta employees are daily users of Metamate. This is a huge number, and we believe that it's probably one of the most used internal agentic systems in corporate America and perhaps the world. There are more than hundreds of thousands of messages being answered every week, and satisfaction is around 75%. Now let me tell you this, Meta engineers do not give praise lightly, so these are really amazing numbers. Now in terms of what can you do with Metamate, or what can it do for you, it actually spans many workflows. The first one is knowledge synthesis. I personally suffer from document overload. I receive tens of new documents every day. With Metamate, I could summarize these documents into bullet points and then zoom in on the areas that I need to focus, finishing my work much more efficiently. But that's not all. Actually, Metamate is integrated into so many other tools here at Meta via sidebars. We actually have more than 50 integrations, like our calendaring tool, our code diff tool, and our data pipeline system. This leads to millions of engineering hours saved annually. Metamate has established itself from a neat, cool experiment that actually my colleague Aparna started into a critical teammate faster than any tool I can remember. But great adoption usually hides gnarly technical challenges. So time travel with me to understand the evolution of Metamate. Metamate evolved in 5 phases. In the first phase, we used a raw LLM. As you would expect, it did not know much about our internal knowledge base because it wasn't trained on our own data. In the second phase, we fine-tuned this LLM with internal metadata and internal metacode. We saw significant improvements in various benchmarks. However, the fine-tuned LLM went out of date significantly and suffered hallucinations. In the third phase, we solved these problems by augmenting our LLM with RAG. This significantly grounded our LLM outputs and resolved a lot of the out-of-date issues. But that was still insufficient. In the fourth phase, we moved into a full LLM model-driven orchestration system. This allowed us to leverage complex multi-turn agentic interactions. It became much more scalable, and we were able to add far more integrations without having to retrain the system or suffer regressions and errors. It was a truly adaptive system. This brings us to our first big takeaway from our recent evolution. We realized that using model-based orchestration enabled us to turn thousands of lines of if-else logic into a single plan prompt. It turns out that if statements are the new technical debt that you need to be really weary of. Now, if statements are quite soothing for your engineers because it gives them more control on the planner and the router. However, we realized With more tools, the logic just became far more complex. It started breaking far more often, and it made adding new tools a lot slower. So in our desire to control routing and planning, the entire situation went out of control. We realized that relying on model-based routing by using a strong LLM that is able to break complex tasks into multi-turn function calls is a much more scalable approach. Now, as I said, we don't have to retrain or even change the logic whenever we add a new tool. This is essentially our agentic version of the bitter lesson. The Bitter Lesson in 30 Seconds is a great article written by Rich Sutton where he summarized that many years of research in making deep learning models smarter, it's what is called inductive bias, actually did not result in big ROI. Deep learning, despite being a transformative technological shift, eventually suffered from diminishing returns. On the other hand, what we've seen with generative AI is that spending less time in making the model more engineered or smarter, but spending more time in scaling data and scaling compute effectively gives you better results. So we realized that replacing our hand-engineered routing with model-based orchestration is our version of the bitter lesson. It turns out that these results that we've witnessed have been also reported by other labs in the industry. We've realized, and they also realized, that when you use model-driven orchestration, you put the language model itself, not the hand-coded decision graph, at the center of the control loop. Instead of routing through brittle if-else logic, the agent's next step is actually predicted by the LLM in the same latent space that produced its answer. So the planner and the executor are sharing the weights and context. And because the planner itself is also a generative learner, MDO adapts to novel edge cases that static pipelines or planners miss. This is really important and powerful. And you can see the impact of this on agentic platforms. They're becoming thinner. LangGraph, as an example, focuses now more on graph visualization, and it also provides some tools to allow developers to debug. So, as mentioned, MDO unlocks significant benefits, but it also unlocks a lot of other capabilities, specifically self-reflective debugging, implicit curriculum learning, and emergent tool chain synthesis. Because the control flow is differentiable, it becomes a lot more powerful. And observability becomes even better. So it is a massive win for developers and agentic system builders. In short, MDO does not just make frameworks thinner, it actually makes agents smarter, cheaper, easier to evolve, and far more advantageous than engineered orchestration. So MDO took Metamate to the next level, but it was still brittle. And that was still not sufficient. Now, before I take you to the last phase, let's just talk a little bit about Model Context Protocol, or specifically the wall that you will face when you use MCP. So MCP is a great protocol. It acts like this universal plug-and-play system to connect models to various other tools. However, anyone who's done this in practice at scale will tell you that models are quite sensitive to a few changes in the tool description, often as simple as just one word change. On top of that, when new model releases come, even minor model releases, it could just break all your logic and you then have to redo it again. So it is still brittle. It's not a problem necessarily of MCP itself, it's a problem of the model iteration process. So how do we solve that? Well, it turns out that there was a similar problem 10 years ago. And the cure for integration at the time, or for the pain of integration, was to slice a monolith into microservices. And what we've done is the same, where we slice the mind of an LLM into subagents. Instead of having one big LLM calling into multiple tools, we have one LLM the model-based orchestration LLM, calling into subagents. Essentially, we wrap each tool as a subagent, and we consider it the smallest deployable unit of cognition. One prompt, one primary tool interface, and one hermetic eval suite. Treating these as first-class services allows us to version them, roll them back, and even A/B test skills the exact same way we would have done with API endpoint. So say the calendar team decided to change their interface or decided to rename something. This only impacts the calendar subagent, not the entire agentic system. Subagents also unlock velocity via modularity. New capabilities no longer have to be added to the agent itself. They are registered. You wrap up your tool, you put in your prompts, and boom, you're ready to go. Another benefit of subagents is parallelism. This is often forgotten. Once cognition is sharded, nothing prevents the planner from fanning out tool-heavy subagents on separate workers. This actually leads to better utilization of compute. Last but not least, subagents become a stability layer. So imagine that your tax rules subagent is drifting into hallucination. You could take it down or roll it back without rolling back or taking down your entire agentic system. So just like traditional microservices isolate state faults, subagents isolate knowledge faults. Frankly, I used to think that multi-agent systems sounded like hype until we realized that it provides the cognitive equivalent of circuit breakers. Once you have them, you kind of wonder, how did you ever ship without them? All right, well, enough slides, and let's start looking into some real use cases of Metamate that demonstrate the power of MDO and subagents. One of the things I struggle with in a big company is figuring out who does what. It sometimes takes me a day to figure out the POC for a particular project or something. But now with Metamate, you can figure that out in a few seconds. So in this case, we asked Metamate to figure out the best engineering contact for our relationship with Google Drive because we want some stuff fixed. And within a few seconds, Metamate was able to give us a great answer. Another example is having Metamate summarize data for you. And in this example, we've given it very detailed instructions. We asked it to look at the last 30 days of posts in the Metamate feedback group and then tabulate it based on engagement so that we could figure out the biggest concerns or problems that our users face. And as you can see, it offered that in a few seconds. If you had to do that manually, it would have probably taken you a few hours. Now, this example here is one of my most favorite. This is actually something that you often see data analysts or data scientists doing, and Metamate here can do it for you in seconds. We asked Metamate to calculate the daily active user rate for the Threads product. And this is a very good example for how Metamate leveraged MDO and subagents. So first, it had to understand what is the Threads project. And then it was able to understand where its data exists and understand the schema. And then it launched another subagent to actually construct the query and then displays that to the user. It gets better. We asked Metamate to actually graph it. So it launched a subagent to execute the query. It received the results and launched another to graph it. All this happened in a few seconds when it could have taken a great data analyst or data scientist a few days to finish. This is also one of my favorite examples. So I swim in a lot of chat messages since the pandemic. And you probably have witnessed this. You're in a chat message, then you have to go do some work for a couple of hours and you come back and you realize you missed about 100 messages in that thread. Now, luckily with Metamate, I could just easily summarize this chat thread and then ask it for an agenda item for next steps. And then what's even more cool is I asked it to go and set up a meeting with all the relevant people so that we could take this thread to the next level. And in that thread, what is really cool is it figured out the participants not just from the list of the chat participants, but also from names that were mentioned in the chat itself. And it was able to resolve their names via a subagent. And then it launched the calendaring subagent to find a slot common for everybody. We are adding even more tools. Actually, no, we're adding more subagents to Metamate. And we're integrating it into other systems from finance to HR. And Metamate will become multimodal, and we're very excited about that future. However, I believe Metamate's greatest opportunity is helping the company build evaluations. The biggest revolution in generative AI and all these amazing coding agents that we see around us is that coding and development or software development will move to evaluation-based development. Whether you're an engineer or not, your job wouldn't be to code the system or build a model. It will actually be building evaluations that tell the system or your coding agent what good looks like. And as everyone knows, building evals is quite hard. And later today, my colleague Shishir will talk more about that. I believe Metamate's biggest opportunity is to help and coach Meta employees in defining these evaluations and constructing them reliably, comprehensively, and as efficiently as possible. Metamate started as a chatbot. It has become a Coworker, and it's on its track to coach us all. Let's build that future together.